Hello and welcome to Samuel's Fortress. I'm your host Kirill, and today we're going to be discussing the process of ethnogenesis, how nations form, and specifically how the Bulgarian and the Macedonian nations form. And to help us do that today, we have a very special guest on the channel, Professor Ivanov from the University of Cincinnati. How are you this evening, Professor?
Thank you so much, Kirill. I am great, and I'm very much looking forward to our conversation. And I want to thank you for the opportunity to be on your channel. And also, I want to thank you for all the great work that you do with Samuel's Fortress, which is really a very, very informative, very rich, and very nice channel, and a very nice space to distribute and collect, process and distribute information about topics that we both are interested in.
Thank you very much. And just so the audience is aware, this is not our first time speaking with each other. Those who watch our, let's call it, sister channel, Corridorosum, might have seen us, what was it? That was last year, wasn't it? Towards the end of last year, the beginning of this year, that we were on there discussing some other topics. So it was in December, yes. So those of the audience who watched that video will all be familiar with you, but for those who are not too familiar with you, can you give us a little bit of background on yourself, where you're from, what you do? Maybe first of all, by the sound of your accent, I think most people can tell you're not originally from Cincinnati. So can you give us a little bit of background on where you come from and where your family's from?
Correct. So I've spent the last 20 years in Ohio. But obviously my accent indicates, rats me out that I wasn't born in this part of the world. I am from Sofia, born and raised in the town of Sofia. I'm Bulgarian by origin. I'm not necessarily see myself as ethnic Bulgarian, just as Bulgarian, civic Bulgarian, I should say. Okay. For the purpose of this conversation, my parents, my ancestry is, so on my dad's side, is from the area south of the town of Stara Zagora. So this is in what we call it Golden Trace, you know. And my mom's side, my family, their family actually are a refugee from the great town of Kukush or Kilkis in Aegean Macedonia. And today, this year, actually 2023, there's 100 years since they've moved under the guns of the power of the guns, you know, the Greek military, into the town of Sofia to start their Bulgarian dream, so to say. I came in Cincinnati, actually, in the United States, about 20 years ago to date, actually. Okay. This year also marks the 20th anniversary. And I did my PhD here in political science, and then I've taught to several academic institutions, mostly in the Midwest of the United States. I teach international relations, European politics, security, institutions. I also organize part of my courses is, so I've published a book, Transforming NATO, New Allies, Missions, and Capabilities. I'm working on another book manuscript now. They're mostly on international institutions, so I don't study nations and nationalism per se for my academic work. I do teach these topics, and they come across in various different ways in the broader topic of international relations. So I deal with that topic, and so we had a Corridor 8, we had 2 weeks ago, a discussion on this topic because some of the viewers wanted to talk it. That's the nature of the channel as such. So I think we had a wonderful, very interesting and insightful discussion. I look forward to continuing that conversation with you, particularly in the context of Bulgaria, Macedonia, history, politics, and international relations.
Yeah, and I definitely watched that episode you had on Corridor 8, and for those who understand Macedonian and Bulgarian, I would recommend watching that video where you kind of you gave a bit of a presentation, a good presentation on the different, I guess, theories on how nations form, how those processes work, and that kind of gave me the idea for this video where we kind of maybe expand on those ideas and concepts in English for maybe a broader audience. So kind of jumping into it, I'm just kind of ask you straightforward, how do nations form? What are the main theories on national formation, on ethnogenesis, and all those kinds of processes?
So for the purpose of that conversation over there, discussion, we used Ernst Gellner's work. I'm not saying that he's the only, but he's like the gold standard in a way. And as a graduate of Central European University, we've studied Gellner there, and his work has been at the centerpiece of many of the work. So we used nations and nationalism and the other, and some of his other work on nationalism. And I think this is something that you, Kirill, already touched upon on a number of videos, particularly the one that was about the Bulgarian exarchate.
Yes.
And I warmly recommend for folks who are watching this channel and who haven't had a chance to watch it. I rewatched it last night. Again, it was a wonderful, very, very informative video, so warmly recommend it.
Thank you.
And you highlight pretty much along the Gellner's narrative that nations don't, they're not something that existed for like hundreds or thousands of years and looking for what they call it, a millennial continuum. I'm trying to mimic Kotsarev, the Mano president right now. There's something relatively new, just like modern languages are a relatively new phenomenon. About 200 years, 250 at most. Some nations are still forming and emerging right now, an ongoing process. But the thing that we all agreed is that nations usually emerged, the concept, the notion of nation emerges in this transition between traditional societies and modern societies, modernity that we know it. It's somewhere between late 18th century for the early comers and throughout 19th century. This is the period where nation formation starts. It doesn't have a start date and an expiration date. It is a lengthy process, but it happens when that modernity comes to the surface. You know, it happens because people start to become much more connected, because technology comes, because communication comes, and education comes, you know, and education becomes relevant and important. And particularly when we talk about Bulgaria, Macedonia, the Balkans, it's clearly that it is sometime in the 19th century, somewhere in the middle of the 19th century. The Greek rebirth or revival or awakening started probably a little bit earlier. Serbian also, formation of states in one way or another certainly helps tremendously because it helps build institutions, it helps aggregate interests, you know. Bulgaria, in that case, and even Albanian nation building was a little bit later, maybe like a decade, maybe 2 decades following that process. But again, we're talking somewhere in the mid 19th century. Because the processes, the social types of social relations transformed in a way that it introduced, you know, the necessity to build that nations. And so here I'm also drawing a little bit on in other, I've discussed it other places with Alex Wendt, who says that as a result, of course, nations are constructs. They're not something that is set in stone because you had the Rosetta Stone or because you had the son of Kutlesh, the Star of Vergina. That's what determines you that you're a Macedonian, you know, because your genes have a certain characteristics that determine how you look, how you act, how you behave. That's not what determines you. It's the idea of that you have a social nation, is a modern nation, is a social construct. And social construct, we have the 3 I's: ideas, interests, and institutions. And so they all together have to combine and match in a way that foster the process of nation building. Now, I don't want to discount that nothing existed before 19th century. Before 19th centuries, we had pre-national characteristics, characteristics that are associated with folk with narod, and these are both words used in Gellner's terms, that existed, but they did not exist at national level. So it existed at a lower level. If you go even further back into the Middle Ages, then you're going to see that even the folk or narod would not exist. But before that, you'll have tribal structures, in some areas. In other areas, you might have where Roman Empire, major empires were some form of formation. But again, those are all these benchmarks. Preceding nations are pre-national characteristics,
But
ethnic,
I need to
yeah.
cut you off here, but when I watched your presentation on Corridor 8, it seems that the theory you're putting forward on how nations form as a modern phenomenon is maybe one of, I think you put forward 3 separate theories in that presentation on ethnogenesis, national formation. It seems like you're describing, I think in that presentation, the third theory, which is a constructivist theory of national formation, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. So
what are the other 2 theories that I think, based on your talk, maybe do leave some room for a pre-modern concept of nation and nationalism, nationality? What are those 2 other kind of maybe competing theories to constructivism?
So this was based off of a work of Crawford Young, The Rising Tide of Cultural Pluralism. And so he actually introduced this. He didn't even call them like theories, but more like lenses or conceptual analytical frameworks through which you can look at modern day identities, and identity formation. And so he said, first is the primordial approach. The primordial approach is the one that primarily links nations to specific ethno-characteristics, whether they come from the whatever call it, the Caucasus Mountains, whether they come from ancient Greece, whether they trace the roots back to Alexander the Great, or from the Viking areas. They have certain characteristics, like pale, dark-skinned, tall, short, strong, and so that's how nations differ. They have similarities, but they also differ, and they differ on some primordial distinctive characteristics, and
you
so
that's more of a maybe like a biological view of ethnicity or of nationality.
And also that has to do with this idea of tribalism, like the tribes have certain characteristics, and not tribalism in an offensive or negative sense, but this is how we have taught, and modern science has social science has approached the issue of nations and nation formation for a very long time. For a very, very long time. It's the idea that one tribe comes here and that tribe reproduces itself and maybe mixing up with other tribes or other ethnic groups, and that's how nations come to be. So nations are first and foremost linked to their biological, ethnic, sociological characteristics.
I think there's certainly a phenomenon of when people discuss ethnicity, nationality, a lot of times, and I'm not a geneticist by any stretch of the imagination, but people will often compare haplogroups or genetic characteristics of one nation to another to kind of make differences. Do you view that as totally illegitimate? Now, I understand that's probably not how humans have obviously, 1,000 years ago, people were not aware of what haplogroups were, kind of modern genetic analysis. But do you think that's completely illegitimate to analyze ethnicity or nation through that type of lens?
No, I am not discounting it altogether and saying, hey, just forget about it. But as a result of this primordial approach, for example, you and I watch oftentimes, I don't know how much we do watch it, we should probably spend, but if you look on the internet, there's like fervent, vigorous debate that is going on between Bulgarians and Macedonians. And Macedonians are trying to tell you, you don't belong, you're different genetically than us through that Tatar-Mongol characteristics. And they say, well, we never had one of those Tatar Mongols, Proto-Bulgarians, enter into Macedonia. Hence, we're genetically different from you. Hence, we're not Bulgarians, you know. And we say, oh no, our Bulgarians respond to this, say, it's Kuber, one of the three brothers, one of the Asparuk's brothers, sorry, thank you, who came, and because he came and had sex with your local and his tribesmen, that's why you are Bulgarians. That's why we are genetically similar. And, you know, to be honest, I look at this debate and it's like, it really doesn't matter what Kuber and his tribemen did to determine whether or not Bulgarians and Macedonians shared the same nationhood for some time over the years. There were other more important circumstances that mattered, you know. So it's like we're talking about something that is irrelevant. Yes, characteristics matter. I'm not discounting in that sense. You know, yes, I mean, if you want to make the difference, I know my Macedonian background and my Macedonian family, so to say, the Kukush family in Sofia that I've grown up with, and I know my family in Stara Zagora, in Golubovo, the town, in Thrace, you know. And yes, if you want to be very primordial, people in Thrace are different than people of Macedonia. People of Macedonia are very sensitive. They're very passionate. They can very easily get offended, you know, and you really need to navigate through their inner cycle to be able to make. If you know how to do that, you will survive. If not, you will always do something wrong and you will be criticized. People in Thrace are not quite as passionate. This is a very primordial explanation. And yes, sometimes it is actually true. It really helps me a lot also when I communicate with, now I do a lot with Macedonians from North Macedonia, from the Republic of North Macedonia, formerly formerly Republic of Macedonia, and yes, it helps me tremendously. My ability to deal with my family in Sofia from Kukush family is very, very helpful in knowing how, in predicting how they think and they act.
Yeah, I think
so. I'm not completely discounting the relevancy of
I mean, even if we look at, you know, another, I guess, controversial theory is, you know, sometimes called a theory. I think there's quite a bit of evidence for the Slavic migration of the early Middle Ages. I mean, the Slavs migrated pretty far deep into Greece, even down to the Peloponnesus and whatnot. And you could say those people have, you know, Slavic genes. However, that's not a Slavic society. So even though maybe the genetics are present, there were other cultural, institutional forces that override that genetic presence there of the Slavs, to where there's really not much of a Slavic culture there to speak of, Slavic language, and you had a, you know, dominance of the Hellenic culture there. So again, not discounting genetics, but I think historically there are other processes, other forces that can sometimes override those things in terms of national formation, how people think of themselves and think of their history. So mentioning the constructivist, which was the first kind of theory that I think you put forward, or concept you put forward, that, you know, these are kind of modern social constructs, nations. Then, you know, the other theory is the more primordial, which kind of, again, is more of a older, more tribal sense of nation. There was also a second kind of lens that people view nationhood through. What is that?
This is the instrumentalist. So Riang talks about sort of the instrumentalists in instrumentalizations, you know. And this is really important to understand, because the idea of identity is used as a tool. as a tool to convince others about something, as a tool. So this is the whole process of creating a historical narrative, linking certain origins to a certain historical narrative, and a story that pretty much you're telling. It's important, and you use nationhood and nation building, nations and identity for specific purposes. And I'm not saying for bad purposes necessarily. It could be for bad purposes. And yes, particularly ethnic nationalism and ethno-nationalism has had a very bad history and very bad mark throughout 20th and even in even today, but 21st century. But what we also see is that nations and nation building is the tools for building nations, and the tools for using certain events as the use of certain events as a tools to build nations, can be also seen in a good way. It creates a sense of togetherness in society. It creates a shared language. It creates this force of mobilization, and that mobilization force can actually bring a lot of positive things to society. I mean, remember, modernity has happened through the idea of modern states and modern, particularly nation states. And those nation states have brought also good things to their people, not necessarily only good things, but also good things, And so this is particularly important to understand how national myths are built, and particularly when you have conflicting myths. And this is what we have, unfortunately, in these disputes that Republic of North Macedonia, now formerly Republic of Macedonia, is engaged with Greece particularly, and with
Sure.
Bulgaria. This is a historical narrative that was instrumentalized, and an attempt to instrumentalize a narrative that enters into other nations' narratives, So Bulgarian historical narrative intersects with and overlaps with other narratives, particularly the Romanian over the Second Bulgarian state. But all in all, it's pretty much, particularly with neighboring states other than not Macedonia, we don't have competing narratives. We know who Basil is, and we know what Basil did, and we know, because he was the Bulgar slayer, we know that he's not our guy, So we don't have a problem with the Greeks on that, We might have other problems with them, how many people they slaughtered, how many we slaughtered, who started the fire of Kukush, who started the fire of Nigrita, but those are a little bit easier. And so when certain narratives are instrumentalized in a way that intersects or enters into the narrative of neighboring states, that becomes a problem. And that's some of the roots of the disputes that we have now, and that we've been dealing with, and that your podcast, as well as other podcasts, have tried to sort of clarify, bring to surface, and elaborate on those, And then, of course, construction is the most modern way of thinking. It's more like the last 20, 25 years, that scientists have talked about the idea that it's not just how you look, but it's also how you think and how you act and react, and what circumstances have led to the formation, modification, disappearance of national identities, which is the idea of social construct. Now, I, in my own work, don't lose constructivism a lot to explain how international institutions work. I don't need that. But when I talk about identity, and this is a very hot topic, and a topic that I personally am also engaged in and invested in, because we need to have these conversations. There are some big issues, problems in the historiography, both Bulgarian, but mostly Macedonian historiography, and so I feel that I need to inject myself into this conversation through the opportunities to talk to you and other podcasts, because we need to have this discussion. It needs to happen now. We can't just avoid that conversation. We've been trying to. I have very good friends in Skopje. For a long time, we just said we're not going to talk about history, and so it's always the Macedonians who want to talk history. I want to talk about contemporary IR. They want to talk about history. I said, fine, we'll talk history. We'll talk history until death, So we've hopefully get this history resolved before we die. That's my approach now.
Right. So now that we kind of, explore the different perspectives through which maybe academics specifically kind of view the process of nation formation, historically, um, is it your understanding that, let's say, the constructivist or the more modern concept um, totally denies the existence of pre-modern nations? Because I've made the argument on my channel numerous times in numerous videos that I personally am convinced that the Bulgarian nation was formed in the 9th century by Boris and Simeon, Boris the First and Simeon the Great, his son. But obviously, the 9th century is a pre-modern time period, and you mentioned Basil II, who warred with Tsar Samuel, and Basil is known as the Bulgar Slayer. So obviously, there's the concept of Bulgarian in that time period. So if the idea is that pre-modern nations, or it's illegitimate maybe to speak of pre-modern nations, then how do we make sense of, let's say, the term Bulgarian or even the term Serbian that exists in the Middle Ages? How should we interpret what I consider the nation building project of Boris and Simeon? How does that, is that an illegitimate? Am I wrong to speak of nation building in the Middle Ages from your perspective, or from even a constructivist perspective?
No, you're not wrong. You're not totally wrong, nor am I totally right. What we need to draw is that when we use the word nation, and you will see that actually one of the PowerPoints that it's Dame Gruev himself talks about a nation. I think we need to make this distinction between a nation and a narod. Narod is the people, and in terms of, so that's why I want to say that this is more of a definitional thing. You use the term nation in the Middle Ages. I'm not saying you were wrong, but what you implied is something related to the Middle Ages. So we can use the term, what I suggested is let's focus on the word nation as something that happens from 19th century onwards, and we'll talk how this process, in my understanding and my interpretation, develops. So I'm going to take my own twist on Gellner, but you were right. It was building of medieval narod, medieval people, and yes, we saw the disappearance of the tribes during the Boris and Simon period. The first Boris the First and Simon. This is the golden age,
Right.
the golden age of the Bulgarian, the medieval Bulgarian state. And yes, I mean, there was this convergence. Now, why wasn't it the modern nation building? First of all, because again, the Solun and the Ohrid, the centers created, and of course the Pliska centers created this codification of the language, this translation of the literary legacy, and all of this. And this was a tremendous accomplishment, but this was a very small elite that actually could read and write. You still need to rely on the drawings and paintings in the churches, to explain religion. That was a method of communication. So if you assume that over 90% of the people were illiterate, and even if they were higher percentage were literate, let's say, but over the course of the years, especially during the Ottoman years, 95, 96, 97, 98% were illiterate, then you can't have this massive reproduction of knowledge and culture through educational institutions that take you to modernity, So that was pre-modern. You could call them pre-modern nations. Or
so is it, I don't mean to cut you off, but
people.
are you implying that a nation cannot be a nation in the modern sense unless all of the people contained in that state understand that they're part of that nation? I mean, would it be illegitimate to have, let's say, an educated elite and a mass of peasants and still talk about a nation? As long as, because this is kind of like what I'm thinking. Let's look at Saint Clement in Ohrid, right? So Saint Clement was the head of the literary school in Ohrid. He was funded and established there by Boris and then later Simeon, right? So it was Clement then who kind of propagated Orthodox Christianity and the Slavic liturgy, Slavic language to the peasants. So maybe they didn't participate directly in, you know, the translations, the maybe the direct understanding, reading of the text and whatnot, but they were still participants in that culture and that cultural transformation, even though they weren't obviously participating on, let's say, an elite level, if you want to use those terms. So, but the way I view it is, I mean, there's still literary institutions, church institutions. So you have a state that through its institutions is essentially homogenizing a tribal people into a unified polity and into a unified group of people. How does that necessarily differ from, let's say, modern nation building processes of the 19th century, 20th century?
Well, so in the modern nation building process, as I said again, you have a massive educational system. And without a massive educational system, you can't have a modern nation. You can have a pre-modern, medieval, whether you call it a nation, a folk, a narod, people, that's okay. And it's based on a number of different characters. And so we have to analyze every event that occurs in the context in which it does. So if you're living in 9th or 10th century, we have to understand how the world operated in 9th or 10th century. And let's make it very clear that Ohrid, Pliska, and Preslav and Solun were one of the most advanced places of the civilization. They were the New York cities, the Tokyos, you know, of modern civilization, you know. There's no doubt about that. You know, the literary tradition that was coming out was, okay, maybe not the center, maybe the Roman and Athens and Constantinople were a little bit more advanced, but they were just right after that, you know, in terms of culture, in terms of literacy, in terms of, but they were still 9th century, and still 90% of the people didn't know how to read and write. Yes, they had other ways to pledging allegiance to the central authority. They had other ways, but we can't imagine that their level of conscious and develop has advanced to the level that we have it in the 19th century. 19th century, we had a lot more advanced level of loyalty through knowledge, through myths, through institutions. Theirs was more, so I would tend to say that many of the Albanians that lived in Drac, for example, in that whole area all the way to the Adriatic, which were for a long time part of the Bulgarian state, I mean, they were Albanian tribes. My guess is most of them already lived there, but they were comfortable with the Bulgarian state and loyal to the Bulgarian state, and could see themselves and identify themselves also as Bulgarians, you know. Now, again, I'm not a historian, and I don't want to get much deeper into that because, but I understand. I'm sufficiently informed to be able to imagine that in the 9th and 10th century, they had sufficient understanding and loyalty to the central state to form a medieval nation or a medieval people, you know, that are centered around the center of power and are loyal to that center of power. And they know who they are and they know who their opponent is. This is very clear. They're not crazy. They're not uninformed. It's just that they're not that deeply ingrained in this national myths, you know. How many of them knew the myths, the Asparuk and the myth of Asparuk, and how much that was the driving force behind nation formation in the 9th century versus loyalty to Christianity? I don't know, Kirill, but my guess is that because we know that at that time most of them didn't know how to read and write, that probably the level of depth and breadth of that knowledge was more superficial, you know, and that so you could see. Yeah, go ahead.
So it seems to me that kind of the modern, and I think maybe you and I just have a difference of an opinion on this topic, maybe, and that's perfectly fine. But it seems to me that the theory of that you can only have kind of the modern conception of a nation if all the people are very conscious of it, it kind of implies a certain level of egalitarianism within the society, that a society that is hierarchical somehow cannot, or there's difficulty in imagining a hierarchical society to be national in the way that we would think of it today. That I think maybe that's why a lot of people use kind of the 19th century as kind of the basis for kind of a modern understanding of nationalism, because you also had, I would argue it's a more egalitarian and liberal form of nationalism, that the egalitarian ideas kind of went hand in hand with the formation of modern states. So I guess my question is it possible from your point of view to have a nation that is not egalitarian, one that everyone's not on the same level? Is it possible to have a hierarchical, like medieval styled nation? Or is egalitarianism kind of baked into the cake of our modern understanding of nations?
So that's a wonderful question. I think some of those nations still exist in let's say Africa, in bits of Asia, but they're just not modern nation with its other. I mean, Libya. Today in Libya, they still think about tribes, tribal structures. They're bound together by Islam. Percentage of literacy is reasonably high, but tribalism still dominates in Libya, and part of the civil war as well, the divisions that exist. In most of Africa, it's this ethnic groups, that exist. Central Africa, let's say Central African Republic, and even bits of the Arabic Peninsula. So my guess is that they're really not traditional modern nations in the way that we understand them as such,
Is it possible that there are?
Yeah,
because I'm just, anyone can check this if they don't believe me. But let's say, I forget the website, but there's a website you can go to search text within the Bible. So you can pull up, let's say, the Old Testament or the New Testament or whatever chapter you want. Let's just say you pull up the book of Genesis, and then you can pick which version of the Bible you want. So let's pull up the Old Testament and search using King James English, which is a pre-modern form of English. I think the King James Bible, if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong, was 1619. Don't quote me on that, but certainly the 1600s are pre-modern. So if you search the Old Testament using King James English, you type in the word nation and search, you see the word nation pop up throughout the book of Genesis, which is the first book of the Old Testament, using a pre-modern form of English. So I guess my point here is that the term nation was not foreign to either pre-modern Europeans or even people thousands of years ago. So is it possible that just the type of nationalism or nationhood you're describing is just a modern form of it, but it is legitimate to speak of nations in a pre-modern form?
Yes.
Would you agree with me on that? Or
yes, absolutely, without any doubt.
Okay.
It's a definitional issue. Yes, I agree with you. And that's how I approach it, from a definitional perspective. And again, it's not my own idea, but that's how I read Gellner. And I tend to like Gellner, and I tell you later why I like Gellner in the context of Bulgaria and Macedonia.
Okay. Well, let's kind of get into that, though. So let's, now that we kind of discuss the background and the different theories on how nations form, let's kind of go specifically into Bulgaria and Macedonia. So just to kind of lay out, and I think I've already done this a little bit, but just to be a little bit more concrete, my theory on how the Bulgarian nation formed, and then we can get into the Macedonian nation, which I feel is a more modern outgrowth of the kind of historic Bulgarian nation. So in my mind, and I've made videos on this, I would argue that the Bulgarian nation, at least in some form, a pre-modern form, was based on a conscious nation-building project by Boris, Prince Boris I, and his son Prince Simeon, later Tsar Simeon the Great, in the 9th, early 10th century. And this was essentially a project to unify all the different tribal peoples living in the borders of the First Bulgarian Empire, to homogenize them, to stabilize the empire. And that homogenization took place using two two kind of forces, language and religion. So you had a implementation of Orthodox Christianity, kind of overriding the different pagan tribal identity, tribal beliefs of the various people, whether they're Thracians, other kind of Romanized Balkan peoples, Slavs, Old Bulgars, kind of homogenizing them using Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, and then a common liturgical language, literary language, that being either Old Bulgarian or Old Church Slavonic, however you want to think about it. And there were institutions such as the literary schools in Preslav and Ohrid that were instrumental in that process. Now, I think that identity weakened during the Ottoman Empire, when those, even during the Byzantine Empire, when they were in control, when those institutions were destroyed, disrupted for several hundreds of years. And I would argue that the Bulgarian national identity was weakened as a result of those institutional losses, that there were no Bulgarian institutions in place any longer, governmental church institutions, to kind of carry on that idea. And then you kind of entered, as opposed to the golden age under Simeon, you entered into a dark age of Bulgarian national identity during specifically the Ottoman Empire. And then towards the, let's say, late 18th and into the 19th century, when the Ottoman influence was weakening, when the influence of the Ottoman Empire was waning, we see a resurgence of Bulgarian identity and the reestablishment of Bulgarian institutions, specifically the Bulgarian Exarchate Church, and thereby, by the reconstruction of these institutions, specifically, like I said, the church, among others, but I think that was kind of the main driving force. We see a revival, as it's called, the Bulgarian National Revival, a resurgence of that identity. So to me, just a long way of saying, I don't particularly view the 19th century Bulgarian revival as creating a Bulgarian identity, but more of resurrecting the weakened Bulgarian identity, which was still present during the Ottoman period. That kind of, if you kind of want to think of it as like a roller coaster, kind of, peaked during the Middle Ages, kind of, declined severely during the Ottoman Empire, and then kind of, shot back up during the modern period. But I guess some might argue that something new happened in the 19th century, disconnected from the Middle Ages and everything that came before that. So that's how I view the Bulgarian nation. I do view a continuity from, let's say, the first Bulgarian Empire to today. Do you share that opinion, or do you think that something new was created in the 19th century?
So I look at this sort of, so this is, and I don't mean to be discounting or this, but this is, I'm very well familiar with this narrative because I went through the Bulgarian educational system. My entrance exams were history, so I am well aware of this narrative. And by the way, this is not just a narrative of the Bulgarian. This is a universally accepted narrative of how nations originate. Up until, let's say, 20, 30 years ago, the dominant, and Crampton, that you've cited extensively, yes. Richard Crampton, other historians. I've worked with Arnold Supan in Vienna, who is actually expert on Yugoslavia and the former Yugoslav states. They have this understanding, and very much I don't have a cognitive dissonance hearing that story. No, that was how it is. So my argument is this was what we call it a necessary but not a sufficient condition, and so part of the reason is because the Middle Ages, the darkness of the Middle Ages ended the way it did, particularly in case of Bulgarian population. First, you had so many generations changing over the course of the years. Second, I mean, this is, let's say, 500 or 400 years.
I don't mean to cut you off. I know you're trying to explain, but can I ask you? Do you think that the people during the Ottoman period, I mean, did they call themselves Bulgarian, and what do they mean by that? If there's a disconnect,
some people did call themselves Bulgarian. There was a limited number of intellectuals who did, but 15th, 16th, 17th, early 17th century, throughout 17th, so 16th, 17th century, most of the Bulgarians were actually living in the mountains. They're trying to survive. They're trying to stay away from the Greeks. Yes, they had things in common among themselves. They spoke similar languages, but you have to understand that they also pretty much traveled within a limited area. They didn't have the amount of communication. So did they really have formed national conscience? Probably, but we see also with and I'll talk a little bit in a later that's one of the latest books, İpek Yosmanoglu, Blood Ties, Religion, Violence, and the Politics of Nationhood. It's 2014, and she's exactly tackling these issues even in early 19th century in Macedonia, but very much so in the other parts of the Balkans, Thrace, Mysia, Dobruja. So there was this emerging elite, prostejši bolgarski narod, Joachim Krčuski. They were educated, some of them in Russia, some of them in other centers. They had an idea. They probably spread this idea and probably existed among many people. But again, I don't know if there was a critical mass of people who believed that they're Bulgarians. And I think you also quoted Paisi of Hilendar as a start, an opening conversation. So he's like, "O nerazumni ljudi, unwise."
I don't have the quote, but yes, I know the quote.
Yeah.
Yes.
Why are you ashamed of saying that you're a Bulgarian?
Yes,
so
yes.
Part of the reason they were ashamed because new national ideas and myths were distributing, particularly the Greek myth and idea, and those were much more strong and much more prevalent because, again, Greek culture goes back to one of the oldest civilizations in the world. How can you compete with that? And second, I assume, this is my interpretation, again, I'm not a historian, and I don't want to claim more expertise than I actually have, and it's not so great, expertise. But the way I imagine it, again, that's what multi-perspective approach means. I'm actually going to try to imagine how these people think. It's probably they were more worried about survival, just managing day-to-day routines, and they probably didn't spend a lot of time thinking about it, reflecting upon it. And many of them didn't read and write, so they probably had some very basic knowledge and understanding, of this. I don't mean to discount them, show them that these people are primitive or something. Not at all. These are our ancestors, but we have to understand that the context, the time in which they operated. That's why I don't want to see that there was this idea of national conscience fully developed through myths, through beliefs, through ideas, in that sort of 1850s, 1840s, 1850s,
This would be my argument to that. I mean, let's say the Bulgarian peasant, even though he's not fully conscious of, let me put it like this. He still lives the Bulgarian peasant during the Ottoman period still lives his life in the manner in which Boris and Simeon formed it, which by which I mean they still speak the Slavic language and they still practice the Orthodox faith. So the products of the early Middle Ages are still very much alive in them, even though they are not conscious of what that is. Even though they're not maybe fully aware of the Bulgarian history of the processes that occurred in the Middle Ages, they are still products of those processes. They don't speak Greek. They don't worship pagan gods. They are living their life based on the product of Boris and Simeon, right?
Exactly.
So is it to me, it doesn't seem improper to have some sort of continuity there, because that nothing, I mean, the products of that cultural revolution, which say of the early Middle Ages in Bulgaria, still lives in them in their day-to-day lives. So by that, I fully agree with you that they might not have, that they probably weren't conscious of where their language come from, of how their families adopted Orthodox Christianity. But despite their lack of awareness, they are still products of that of the national formation of the Middle Ages. Would you disagree with me on that?
I would not disagree with you. I would agree actually with you. And that was what I was going to say. Yes, absolutely. So I mean, this is the legacy of Boris and Simeon carried us, us, yes, as a nation through the Middle Ages and through the Ottoman period, and that's who we are. Why didn't they become Greeks? Why didn't they want to go to the Greek school? And I'm going to quote Ljubka Rondova, who's one of the from one of the villages outside of Kostur, whose mother said, when the Greeks came and they tried to force them to learn Greek because to Hellenicize them, and they said, she said, well, you know what? Go ahead, bury me in a grave, and when the Bulgarians come, undig me so I can come out and live normally. They just didn't want to learn Greek. Like my great-grandmother was offered when her first husband passed away to marry a Greek and have him. And she said, no, they did not want to mix up with them, how much that was, and so this is where I don't have the expertise, and I really don't want to dig deeper into this, but some of them accepted that Greek culture. They Hellenicized and they became Greeks, and actually many of the modern day ancestors in Aegean Macedonia barely speak or very little Slavic, whether they call it Bulgarian or Macedonian, but they're mostly Hellenicized, the younger generations, some of them do know, some of them don't know. We see the same thing in the United States. How many people know where their ancestors came from, and how many people speak the language of their? You're actually an exception, for somebody who's come at such a young age to the United States. So that's how I look at this, but what happened is, yes, that legacy, the Slavic language, the Orthodox faith is what kept the other nation building projects. I don't want to call them propagandas because the Skopje literature calls them, the Macedonian literature calls them propagandas. No, they're not. They're nation building projects,
Right.
And we have to call things with the right names. You can't just call people Tatars and propagandists, and expect to be respected, So those nation building didn't do well because they were considered as a foreign, as an alien, even though Greek culture was more sophisticated than, because they chose not to Hellenize, and in a way because they were more basic people. They didn't want to go and experience the high Greek culture. They chose to go for the Slavic project, which the Slavic project of nation building in Macedonia and in Thrace and in Mysia was actually the Bulgarian project, and that's how we turn out to be modern Bulgarians. Now, the foundation of what modern Bulgarians is based on a lot of what they call it. Gellner calls it a sub nations or sub low cultures, not to offend somebody. It's like, but it's a pre-modern basically, which could be again the historical narrative, the story behind that. It could be also the common language, the faith, etc., one or a combination of different things. That a regional identity oftentimes matters. Faith denominations oftentimes matter. So that's not a problem for me, and we have to understand. But the question for me, particularly when we look at this, is what really happened in that middle and late sort of 1840s, 50s, 60s to 1870s that really started a nation-building project in Macedonia, and how those nation-building projects operated. This is, to me, the critical thing to understand what happened in that time, and who tried to build what. And if we clear that out, and I think for most of the world literature knows what happened, the literature in Macedonia is quite confused, and it tends to confuse everybody, confuse itself, its own citizens, its own residents, and everyone else. And that's part of the big problem that we have now, the big poo-poo that we have now.
Right. And before we get to that, it's just a quick side note that it just reminded me when we spoke of the legacy of, and we can move on beyond the medieval period. I just, a lot of Macedonians will say to me, how come it's legitimate for the Bulgarians to claim a legacy from the Middle Ages, but it's not legitimate for us, I'm speaking as a ethnic Macedonian, to claim a legacy from ancient Macedonia. Why is Antiquization or ancient Macedonianism improper? And I would say because whereas the Bulgarians carry on the legacy of the Middle Ages through language and religion, modern Macedonians do not carry on the legacy of ancient Macedonia. There's no linguistic or religious continuity there. Whereas, obviously we are Orthodox Christians and speak a Slavic language, like the medieval Bulgarians. The modern Macedonians do not worship Greek gods or speak a Greek language. So there's a strange, it's strange to me to try to tie those two together. That's just a bit of a side note. So let's,
I agree. Just a side note,
sure,
though,
sure.
just to add one sentence. I actually agree with you, but now I've become more antichki over the course. And I tell you how I have become antichki. No, that was the period my dad in the early 90s hated the Russians. And so he said, I'm not a Slavic, I'm a Thracian,
It seems like a lot of the anti-Slavic people who say I'm not Slavic of the Bulgarians are also very anti-Russian. So I don't know if they're kind of anti-Slavic as a form of protest, but that's a completely different topic for discussion.
Yeah, but he was like, and I was like that, but the Russians came and liberated us. He's like, if it wasn't for the Russians, somebody else would have done to come do that. Just don't want to do them with it. But I actually think that we people living in the Balkans, all peoples and nations, have the right to respect and cherish the legacy of Alexander Bey, who was Macedonian, and Macedonian at that time meant not Hellenic, but also part of the Greek civilization, So we admit that maybe some of our great ancestors, again, my grandmother was born 55 kilometers from Pella. So maybe, but I don't see that direct connection, and I don't intellectually associate, nor do I intellectually associate with Asparuk, and the horse tail, I just don't, I can't. And I don't understand why I need even to have the conversation about the horse tail or Alexander the Great.
There's no question. There's no question in my mind, and maybe I haven't made this clear on my channel. I think I have, but maybe some people are still confused. I'm not saying that there's no genetic connection between us today, people living in the Balkans, and the ancient people who lived on the Balkans. I'm not saying that we're 100% Slavs and that we don't have a large portion of genetic admixture from the ancient peoples. But I think this goes back to what we started at the beginning of the conversation. There are historical, cultural, linguistic, religious processes that sometimes override and are more important in the grand scheme of things than a purely genetic. I've never taken a DNA test because it doesn't interest me, because I know who I am. I know where I'm from. I know what language I speak. I know what my faith is. I know the myths of my people, and I don't need to take a genetic test to show me what percentage Slav, what percentage Paeonian or ancient Macedonian I am, or Illyrian. It doesn't matter to me. So again, I'm not discounting any ancient connection. I just think the way it's often interpreted, or the narratives that come out specifically in Macedonia, the ethnic Macedonian narrative is far too focused on the ancient period and makes unrealistic claims to it. So, okay,
I would say ridiculous claims.
Yes. Okay, so let's move on. I kind of cut you off. So you mentioned how what's important to you in regards to the modern Bulgarian national identity are the processes of the 18th and 19th centuries. So can you please explain what those processes are? How do we get the modern conceptualization of what a Bulgarian is?
So the nation building project, Bulgaria's nation building project, started somewhere in the middle of the 19th century. I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind, actually to show me the second slide.
Sure, let me pull that up here.
And I think that the key, if you want to go with benchmarks, although when we talk about processes, we don't talk about, okay, so that's the last one.
Which slide do you want?
Second one. Okay, there you go. And so this is the first big convention of the creation of the Bulgarian Exarchate, which took place in 1871. Now, before that, they had in 1860s a meeting. So this was not like something that came out of nowhere, Sure. And again, all the details you're going to show, you've already discussed them in your video on Exarchate and the Bulgarian national rebirth. Or so I don't want to get into the details. What I have it's like these are the 10 delegates out of 40 so there's 45 people in that picture. So after the meeting, which was in the suburbs of Istanbul, after the meeting, there was 45 of them. Some of them are representatives of the Turkish authorities, some of them, non-representatives, just sort of helping with the convention. Took a group picture. Some of them are actually missing, but we have pretty much the 10 delegates that were out of 35 that were from the area of Macedonia. These are their names: Apostle Polikarev from the Štip diocese, Todor Iliev Tilku from Strumica. You had 2 representatives from Skopje, and Monk of Rila was actually not represented, but the second representative left, so he was there at the picture. Yakov Gerov from Ohrid, Mikhail Manchev, and by the way, Mikhail Manchev from Ohrid. There's 2 representatives from usually one each diocese. Mikhail Manchev, his great-grandson, is also Manchev, and he was the speaker of the Bulgarian Assembly during that 6-month period when we actually had a government. So this is his great-grandfather, who was actually from Ohrid, representing the Ohrid diocese in 1871. So it wasn't that long ago. This wasn't during the times of Alexander the Great. This is modern times, So you have 2 from Skopje, 1 from Veles, 1 from Vodin, and so there was this big dispute when they came. So to set up the Exarchate in the original Firman, the original permit, that was issued by the Sultan, the Macedonian dioceses were not included, because they were supposed to be ruled by the Greek patriarchy, and so when the Macedonian representatives came, it was like, wait, they're not on the list, And so this was the Georgi Gogol from Vodin. Vodin is Edessa today in Aegean Macedonia, who made this case. How could we not accept them now that they have arrived? Shall we expel them? No, the people will praise us. They are Bulgarians, and that's why we have to accept them. Their very arrival shows us that they are Bulgarians and that they want to be Bulgarians. If someone tells us they're not Bulgarians, then we will respond, here they are, here they are. So why is this so important? I mean, why is this about 1/3, a little bit less than 1/3, 35%? No, it's about 1/3, 35% of representatives at that picture, and I've put those from Macedonia with their respective numbers in red circles, so you can visually see and look. This is where Macedonia is relative to the rest of Bulgaria.
Sure.
This is where the modern nation building started, because the Exarchate enabled faith and religion, church building, enabled school building, enabled also the reading chitalish, the reading rooms or cultural centers building, and it stepped on the foundation of the Bulgarian Bulgarian communities, municipalities, which were. And so this is why this is well documented in the literature. This was voluntarily done. Nobody pulled a gun at them,
Right.
And this was a uniform process that it was taking place for about 6 years outside of the within the Ottoman Empire, and then after 1978 it continued to exist. But now we had already part of the territory under the principality, part of it under the province of Eastern Rumelia, and the rest on the Ottoman Macedonia, still the Exarchate ruling. So it was a loose, centralized structure that enabled this education, that brought modernity to modern-day Macedonia, as well as to other Bulgarian lands. And you may say, and I think the reason why I referred several times to this blood ties textbook is because this is the latest sort of work by this Turkish scholar. She's originally ethnic Turk, but American scholar İpek Usmanoglu, who published this. This was a doctoral dissertation defended at Princeton, and she published it in 2014. And the publisher is Cornell University Press, one of the most prestigious publishers, in our field. I'm in political science again. Cornell University Press is a top, I assume it is also a top publisher. And it doesn't draw substantially on Bulgarian Macedonian sources, but mostly on Turkish, Ottoman Ottoman, Greek sources, and as well as English and language and Western source. And a lot of Bulgarian sources are actually through English language sources. And because we were always fed that this narrative that there was two projects of nation building. One was Bulgarian nation building, the other was a Macedonian nation building. And people in Macedonia are led to believe that nation building in Macedonia started during that period, 1860s, 1870s, awakening consciousness. And so they're saying, and this is where the essence of primordial debate that we have. No, you're not Macedonian, you're Bulgarian. No, we are Macedonian. We've always been Macedonian. We could have never been Bulgarian. So this is the essence of this fight, which is now extremely instrumentalized ad extremis, I would say, extremely, particularly in Skopje, But why is it important to understand? Because first of all, you could say you're a Macedonian because you come from the geographic area of Macedonia. You could still call your language Macedonian because it is the local govor, the local dialect, of a Slavic tongue or of an Albanian tongue or of a Greek tongue, which is different from the centrally codified Greek. But you're not participating in a nation building project on your own. And I want to read this for the record. It's from the Blood Ties. By the way, do you know who's the guy here at the center of the picture? This guy, the priest?
No.
Karavangelis. Germanos Karavangelis. So this was from the Hurriyet times when they had signed peace, and so the Turkish the officers with Karavangelis.
Are you talking about the book or on this picture that we're showing?
Yeah, the cover, the front, the cover.
I think we're still showing the. Hold on.
Yeah, we could do that. Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So this is Germanos Karavangelis,
yes.
So she picked up Karavangelis of all the people, the guy who paid 50 lira to Kote, which although he denied after that, to kill Lazo Papatraikov, the greatest of all the Kostur comitages, the voivodas, the greatest of all the Kostur leaders, But see, here is the important thing to understand, and this is what world historiography tells, that the modern, it's on page 15, the modern Macedonian historiographic equation of demands for autonomy with a separate and distinct national identity does not necessarily jibe with the historical record. Does not necessarily correspond to the historical record.
Right.
It's a very politically correct way of saying this is not history. This may be a story, this may be a fiction, but it's not history. So again, you may argue that constructs exist, but construct exists on real things, not on imaginary things, And we need to be very clear. Thank you for the opportunity, Kirill, to say it out loud on your. A rather obvious problem is the very title of the organization, which included also Thrace, Imaro, Macedonian Adrianople, or Audrey, which claimed, of course, Thrace, and which was a region that never belonged to modern Macedonian nationalism. Second myth that Macedonian historiography says is that Imaro had nothing to do, and then Imro later had absolutely nothing to do with the exarchate, with the guys with the beards. Almost like the exarchate was this foreign propaganda that was imposed on them, trying to purge the mass. And Imaro were the freedom fighters that came out of the Macedonian loyalty, the Macedonian feeling. Here's what, again, İpek Usmanoglu says. We should not lose sight of the fact that promoting membership in the exarchate was the principal means of immoral propaganda and mobilization, and that the school teachers who doubled as immoral recruiters, I should say, were appointed to their posts by the exarchate. So they were employees of the exarchate. They were using the exarchate to recruit, and the exarchate was okay with this. The exarchate was a tool. It was an institution for nation building,
Yes. And I think one of the more kind of ridiculous theories is that the Macedonian revolutionaries fought against the exarchate, that they were opposed to the Bulgarian propaganda coming out of the exarchate, which, I mean, I put out a video, I think it was 2 videos ago, I think I titled it, Did Macedonians Support the Bulgarian Exarchate? And it's very clear from the historical record that there's no conflict between the Slavic population living in the region of Macedonia and the Bulgarian Exarchate. In fact, there's some of the strongest supporters and fighters for that Bulgarian Exarchate Church, which was, like you said, the backbone of the Bulgarian nation-building revival of the 19th century.
And so here comes the second part. As a result of this cognitive dissonance, because I've went many times through this with other people, they're like, well, what about here and here? Source, they're calling their language Macedonian. They call themselves Macedonian. They're called here and they're Macedonian. Yes, that's okay. And so are Thracians and Mesians and etc. Right. And they never saw that as a conflict, But the important thing is that the institutions that were created, the interest and the ideas were uniform, similar. They originated on different stories. But why are they talking about Alexander the Great? That's okay. I'm going to tell you a different story, actually. You need all the Bulgarian history, all the Tatars and Mongols to get to Alexander the Great. Otherwise, you have a complete discontinuity, which is modern Macedonian historiography. So Bulgarian historiography could well be the bridge to get to Alexander. If I was on the historical committee, I would buy everything and I'd say, just give me Simon, give me Boris, give me the second state, along with the Romanians as well, the Vlachs, And then I am actually getting through these bridges to Alexander as a part of the legacy of mankind, Right. But you can't just make up stuff, I'm sorry, I become passionate about it, but
I mean, if you look
need to hear that.
No, I mean, I'm not a member of the Macedonian Patriotic Organization, the MPO, but if you look at their kind of history books, and I when I made my MPO video, I discussed this, that they consider themselves Bulgarian, and their history starts with Alexander, goes through, the medieval period, talks about Boris, Simeon, into the modern period. And because there's a continuity there, that historiography, that historical narrative just simply makes more sense than deleting the entire Bulgarian portion out of the history and jumping from Alexander to Samuel, then another jump from Samuel to Gotsadelchev. Yes, go ahead.
And I'm going to ask you also, show me the Pavel Shatev, the third slide, because I think this is going to illustrate Pavel Shatev. Who's Pavel Shatev? This was one of the original Gemegis. You could call him a terrorist or a suicide bomber, basically. Well, no, they were not suiciders, but they were certainly blowing up the Ottoman Bank, the Guadalquivir, the ship, in sort of signaling the beginning of the or around the times when the uprising started. He also was sort of a left-leaning anarchist. Some may argue later has moved toward far left to the sort of more the totalitarian ideas. I don't know that. I'm not completely sure. But he was also at Asnom. He was the first minister of justice for the modern Socialist Republic of Macedonia. But his identity was slightly different, And in 1934, he published a collection of essays in the town of, it is in Sofia, but it was called, the collection of essays, the volume was called Salonika. And so he wrote basically notes on the Bulgarian Enlightenment in Macedonia. And actually he gives you, this is the best account of the Bulgarian Exarchate. He tells you that there were 74,000 schoolboys and girls at the last year of the Exarchate, 1912, There were 1,000 I think, schools operating in Macedonia. And there was like about, I think, I have to look at the numbers again, high schools, elementary and middle schools, and then high schools. I think there were like 10 main high schools. Like, you have to understand that a high school, of course, the famous Salonika Bulgarian high school, but you are also going to have one in Bitula, in Štip, where Delchev was. So there were 10 of those, sort of, which were sort of the places where the elite really was churning. And so here's how he starts in the introductory paragraph. And now they're trying to rehabilitate him in Skopje and show him that he's this ethnic Macedonian. He's a Macedonian, no doubt about that. But his nation-building understanding is very consistent with what you just outlined and what is the mainstream Bulgarian approach. And he says the Slavic enlightenment in Macedonian developed parallel to the enlightenment of all other Bulgarian territories, implying on Greece, Thrace, Mysia, and Dobruja. We find its roots in the distant times of the Middle Ages, when, as a result of the ethnic combination between the Proto-Bulgarians and the Slavic tribes, no Tatars, no Mongols, no anything else, that inhabited Mysia, Thrace, and Macedonia, one unified nation, the Bulgarians, and a unified state, Bulgaria, came to being. In the 9th century, this new nation not only adopted Christianity as an official state religion, but thanks to the apostle brothers of Saint Cyril and Methodius, who were born in Salonika, as well as their student, it also developed its own writing. Who said that just a few minutes ago? It was Kirill. So, this is the narrative. Yes, I'm willing to open up this framework, make it more flexible, and we can have an intellectual and ecumenical debate as to whether and how and to what extent that mattered as opposed to other factors. But in the essence, this is a narrative that was promoted by the first Minister of Justice of North Macedonia, of that time, Socialist Republic of Macedonia. The first minister ever of justice. And for that reason, we believe, was one of the reasons why he was ousted, he was removed, and he died a couple of years later in basically complete isolation from the rest of the world, and utmost poverty, The language of the first Slavic writing is known in the literature as Old Bulgarian language, which was spoken by our ancestors in the vicinity of Salonika, includes my great-grandmother. So there you go. Why is this, if you look at this, for you and me and for the most of the modern literature, this is okay. This is not okay for the historiography in Skopje today. Right. Okay, I am willing to remodify, change, expand, modernize this framework. It's 1934 in the end of the day. He wrote that 90 years ago, But the essence of the narrative is undisputed not only by the world, but Bulgarian, but its neighbors and world historiography. And this is the important thing that we need to know.
Did you want to go through some of those other slides? I know you had some quotes from the other.
So the other thing is, my point was, it's been always, yes, you need to have a combination of interests, ideas. We'll go in a few seconds, but interests, ideas, and institutions. So you have the institutions, the exarchate. You never had a Bulgarian state on the territory, which really circumscribed, limited the ability to modernize the identity and to make it a solid Bulgarian identity in the way that it worked, for example, in other parts of this territories near Bosilegrad and Tsaribrod, which are Dimitrovgrad and I think in Bosilegrad still it's called, which are the two towns in Serbia now, because they were prior to 1918, they were in the territory of Bulgaria, the Kingdom of Bulgaria. Before that, it was the Principality. And they were also, so Bulgaria controlled these territories. That certainly helped a lot more. In Macedonia, the ability of the absence of Bulgarian state certainly circumscribed this ability to influence. And then also these minorities in Serbia were protected after World War I because there was no question that these people were ethnic Bulgarians under the definition in 1918. However, in Macedonia, it was seen like, Serbs said, no, these were ethnic Serbs,
Right.
South Serbs, Southern Serbs,
Right.
And of course, Greeks said they were Slavophone Greeks, so they were under much stronger assimilation. So yes, absence of some institutions and the presence of and weaker, particularly in certain parts of the population, identity formation might have contributed toward quick adaptation. I argue it's not just this. This was also a bunch of other circumstances that matter, but it also shows you why Bulgarian identity is better preserved in Eastern Serbia, in Bosilegrad, Tsaribrod, and even it's better preserved in places like Moldova, Ukraine, modern-day Ukraine, because it's always had since 18th century, even it's never been part of Bulgaria, but you had the educational institutions there.
Sure.
The High School of Belgrade, which is, by the way, where Poroshenko studied, the former president of Ukraine. He was not Bulgarian, but he said, I hung out with a lot of Bulgarians, just like Ataturk in Salonika.
I didn't know that.
Bulgarians. But bottom line is, of course, if you have these educational institutions, they really help build.
Right.
And so this is what I'm also been trying to show, Kirill, is that I can show the other slides and what I'm going to just show me Tatarchev and then show me Misirkov.
Before we get to that, I mean, that's kind of
yeah.
why I'm slowly working my way through the biography of Georgi Rakovsky, but I think that's kind of why he's also viewed as an important figure in the formation of the modern Bulgarian nation, is because you're putting, and rightly so, a lot of emphasis on the education of the common person in Bulgaria as, I guess, crucial in the forming of the modern Bulgarian nation. And reading Rakovsky's biography, it seems that was also his view, and that's why he was so focused on creating literary works promoting Bulgarian education and so forth, even in places like Moldova, modern Ukraine, and so forth. So I think that's probably why we view him as an important figure in the formation of the Bulgarian nation, because of his emphasis on spreading Bulgarian education and kind of Bulgarian literature and whatnot. So just kind of wanted to throw that in there. But yes.
And so this is where I just want one more sentence to add here.
Sure.
This is why I actually think that the Ottoman Empire, as much as it was an oppressive political, social, and economic system, on identity level and on educational level, actually it wasn't so bad. In fact, it allowed Bulgarians and Macedonians to operate in a single space, integrated until 1878.
Sure.
And it allowed us to build. Frankly, they chose not to allow us to have those institutions. If they chose to destroy those institutions, not to create and protect them through the the permit,
Sure.
Probably the nation building project would have been much more difficult, as it turned out after 1913, where nationalist policies basically aimed at wiping out that identity. But why am I saying Hristo Tatarchev, one of the 6 founding members, the first president of the IMRO, because it's often speculated and misrepresented his thoughts. So we need to show this is the original book published in his memoirs, and he wrote them in 1936 in Turin. Was published in Sofia. So the edition that I'm working off, I don't know if it's translated in English. I assume it's not. So we need to make sure that our English-speaking audience is also aware of that thought process. So it's one of the early pages, because it's 45 here showing in that quotation. But he says, our inner feeling and thought moved toward the common Bulgarian ideal. Remember the word common Bulgarian ideal, the joining of Macedonia to Bulgaria. But we had to put a milestone, to put this millstone on a we had to put a millstone on this cultivated over time dream of uniting the Bulgarian and Macedonian people and start doing real politics. My bad, I missed this. That's why we took Article 23 of the Berlin Treaty, which basically allowed for autonomy, as the motto of our activity. However, since this was a very relative, sort of like squishy, wishy-washy concept, we decided to replace it with a more flexible formulation: the autonomy of Macedonia within its geographical and ethnographic borders. So yes, he talks about Macedonian, the Free Bulgarian, and the Macedonian people, and yes, so he distinguishes between people living in that area. And yes, there's cultural, ethnographic variations between them. But then he talks about this common, universally adopted, voluntarily construct idea called the common Bulgarian ideal. That was how he felt. So was Hristo Tatarchev a Macedonian? This is the primordialism. Or was he a Bulgarian? Well, yeah, he was a Macedonian. Let's just don't fight over this,
Right.
But his identity and his idea of nation building was Bulgarian, the common Bulgarian ideal.
Right. And I guess that's we always see people fighting. I mean, you were on the what was that debate show, Samovistina, on Kanal Pit on Channel 5. And I'm not specific on yours, but I watch debates on that channel from time to time. I find fascinating what is being argued and what the topics are. But you're constantly seeing, you'll have a pro-Bulgarian guy, and he's citing the term Bulgarian that people say. Then the other person is the Macedonian, the ethnic Macedonian, says no, but in this writing he says Macedonian, as if those two had some sort of conflicting meaning at the time. Where if you view it properly, I mean, and you mentioned this before, I mean, there's a regional Macedonian identity that does have its distinguishing factors from other Bulgarians, but there is an underlying Bulgarian identity. And this was obviously, as we spoke about previously in the Exarchate, proven that they were all working towards one common project, one common national revival project. So I think a lot of times when we see the term Macedonian, Bulgarian, we like to view the differences between the two without realizing what the commonality was in those terms during that time period. And obviously today, those terms mean different things than they did back then. And I guess we can talk about this going forward on the separation of the Macedonian identity from the Bulgarian. Obviously, modern ethnic Macedonians today do not view themselves as part of a common Bulgarian ideal. So when, according to you, did that split happen? Because this is often a common debate among people. Is I guess there's multiple extremes here. On one extreme, like you mentioned, there's ethnic Macedonians who say we were never Bulgarian, we don't have any common history. And the other hand, you have Bulgarians who will say that Tito invented the Macedonians in 1945, which are two completely and equally absurd points of view, in my opinion. So when, according to you, from the way you understand history and obviously nation building, the process of nation building, at what point in time is it legitimate to speak of a separate Macedonian nation? When did that, and it's probably not going to be a certain date or a certain period, but or a certain specific period of time, but how does that process work from what you've read, from what you've seen?
So, and I think more and more historians tend to, so going through again this book, which one of the many sources, but I came recently across it, and I thought it was a really fascinating study. And I looked at the most up to date because this is more or less incorporating most modern day theories. And it's also written 13 years after independent Macedonia. So this was sort of in Macedonian historiography in your face, kind of an approach. And so looking at, there's no indication that any nation building was happening before the Balkan Wars. Now, Balkan Wars meant the end of the Exarchate. And so I had a couple of actually quotes, but I didn't translate them. In that period after the Serbian rule and the Greek rule entered into Aegean and the Varder Macedonia. And so what we're seeing during this period, Kirill, is this process, this difficult and slow process by which basically the next generations were a lot worse off than the previous in terms of education. They were forced to go to learn Serbian into Serbian schools. Many of them chose not to resist it because they had voluntarily bought into one type of education system which was completely removed from them. And so they were not really open to the idea of accepting whether, particularly in Aegean Macedonia, it was very painful because they did not want to buy into the Greek. They didn't understand the language. They felt it, and they felt compelled to learn the language. In Macedonia, Varder, it was a little bit easier because they could understand Serbian, but they never accepted it as their own, and particularly the grammar is difficult for them, and so in my understanding, you had by 1930s and 40s, you already had a clear idea that the distribution of power was not such that favored Bulgaria and was not such that favored the reinstallment of the Exarchate and the Bulgarian cultural tradition. And you already had a generation. Now remember, this 0 to 20 years basically that were at that time probably about 35-40% of the demographics, that had already grown without any ties to the Exarchate, without any memory of historical narrative, with an attempt to be forcefully assimilated into Serbian ethnicity, and with their refusal, their resistance to do that, And so I think this generation was the one that first embraced the idea of Macedonism as the third way. And I think Tito and the Comintern, including the Bulgarian communists, accepted that out of the idea that basically, hey, we can't solve that problem by reintegrating this territory into Bulgaria. So they're not Serbs, they just don't want to be one. So let's go for the third way, which is Macedonians. Now, they do the same thing in Thrace and in Dobruja. It never worked in Thrace and in Dobruja. Well, it never worked because in Dobruja, basically what happened is with the Craiova agreement, Bulgaria gained access of southern Dobruja back, and all of the Bulgarian population in ethnic Dobruja, about 100,000 people, 70,000 people was basically exchanged, was moved into Dobruja, and all the about 100,000 Romanians were pushed out into Romania. So it was ethnically cleansed. In northern in Thrace, the Pomaks were the only ones who remained, about 50,000 population in this area of Xanthi, but they never affiliated strong bond because of the religion. They're Muslims, and many of them even associated with Islam, even though they were Slavic speaking, hence Bulgarian. The rest pretty much were moved into Bulgaria proper and then of course the Adrianople area was ethnically cleansed in 1913. So there were maybe some families that chose to stay there, but they chose to stay under the condition of assimilation, accepting the new culture. And so that's why nation building project never happened there. In Macedonia was the only place where a nation building project could have occurred. And yes, I think actually here I look at the communists and say they were not so bad actually. They tried to fix a problem through sort of a new idea. Problem with the communist Kirill is that they can't fix anything because they do everything by force, and that's what we saw: nation building by force, not only in Macedonia, former Yugoslavia, but also in Soviet Union, and that's what we have. But I wanted you to show you. So
can I just interject here, just on that topic before we move forward? I think you kind of mentioned the Balkan Wars as a maybe a crucial point in the formation of a Macedonian nation. I would agree. I would put more. I mean, we're splitting hairs here a little bit. I mean, we're talking a few years difference, but I would say maybe 1919, the Treaty of Neuilly, the end of World War I is really kind of the nail in the coffin of the Bulgarian idea in Macedonia. Unfortunately, because if we look at, let's say, the formation of the Internal Macedonian Revolutionary Organization in 1893, this is a time period when Macedonia and large portions of Thrace, the Adrianople region, are still in the Ottoman Empire, and there's still a possibility of unification with Bulgaria. I mean, the unification in 1885 with Eastern Rumelia and the Principality of Bulgaria, in a way, is a template for how this could occur. You could liberate a region which is still autonomous, and then through one way or another reunify it with Bulgaria. This is still very much possible well into the first decade, even to the second decade of the 20th century. Obviously, the Balkan Wars, those regions, specifically Macedonia, now Aegean and Northern Macedonia, are no longer Ottoman. They are now part of two modern states, Serbia and Greece. However, there is still the possibility during World War I that situation can change, that Bulgaria can essentially retake those territories. So the idea of unifying Macedonia with Bulgaria is not dead during the World War I period. And in fact, many Macedonians fight with the Bulgarian army specifically for this point, because they see this as the opportunity to undo the gains of Serbia and Greece in Macedonia, and to finally unify this region with Bulgaria. I think at the end of World War I, at the end of the treaties, specifically the Treaty of Neuilly, which deals with Bulgarian territories, it's very clear, especially in hindsight, but I think even at that time, it's very clear that the powers of Europe are not going to allow Bulgaria to govern these territories. However, at the same time, the Macedonians do not want to be part of Serbia or Greece. So the only, like you said, the third option at this point is an independent Macedonian state. And I think this is where we see an explicit call for an independent Macedonia, where during the traditional IMRO period, the idea of a completely independent Macedonian state is not that crystal clear. The autonomy of Macedonia within the Ottoman Empire is clear, but what occurs with that autonomous region of Macedonia is debated. Some people want it reunified with Bulgaria. Some people want it to remain independent. But it's really after 1919 into the interwar period that I think we see a kind of crystal clear idea of an independent Macedonia, which is why it's very strange to me that the kind of main promoter of that idea in the interwar period, Ivan Mikhailov, is such a negative figure in Macedonia when he is fighting for an independent Macedonian state. But I think the interwar period is really when it becomes clear that this region of Macedonia will never be part of Bulgaria. And although the people, I think, still think of themselves as Bulgarian in a lot of ways, we see here the real foundations of a separate Macedonian identity kind of being put into place with the realization that this is going to be an area that's separate from Bulgaria. And I think that's really kind of where you see the acceleration of a separate Macedonian identity. And this, again, predates Tito by a couple decades. So the idea that Tito kind of invented this concept is, I think, not true. Now, what he did, and what you mentioned, the communists doing by force is, and I've mentioned this on my channel, is unnaturally and forcefully accelerating the Macedonian process by debulgarizing it, by, even if it took 100, 200 years for a kind of completely separate Macedonian identity to emerge, this was for political reasons done in an accelerated fashion that did damage to not only the relationship between Macedonia and Bulgaria, but the national the conceptualization of the Macedonians themselves. So not to go too much of a tangent there, but I think whether it's the Balkan War period, whether it's the end of World War I think at the end of that series of wars and entering into the interwar period is when we really start seeing a more concrete Macedonian identity emerging.
I completely agree. I'm not going to say I don't, but I completely agree with you. I've spent some time thinking, and it's like, yes, Bulgaria controlled over the short periods of time during the First and Second World War, but I don't think any of those were good times to do nation building and institution building.
During the middle of a war.
You're
Right.
killing people and you're
Yeah.
mobilizing people, so that's why I kind of tended to take them out sort of as an extraordinary circumstances. And the idea of autonomous, and if you want to show me the quote from the IMRO founders, part one, so two quick responses. I completely agree. Number two is what I wanted to say is that IMRO founders, I was going to discuss this quote in a few minutes, but independent Macedonia could have been formed somewhere in 1913, let's say, with Bulgarian, Greek, Albanian and Serbian, constituent elements and strong local. That would have fostered in and if unification with Bulgaria didn't happen, as the Bulgarian national ideal provided for, Macedonian identity as an identity related to that state and the institution could have occurred pretty much the same way as that Flemish identity has developed as a part of the Belgian, as Austrian identity as a part of the
German,
or seceded from the German, separated from the German identity, and could have been, and we could have been exactly the same way now. And Macedonians would still say we're Macedonians, Bulgarians would say we're Bulgarians, but we wouldn't have this dispute. What happened in that period between 1870 and 1919? Who was Goce Delchev? What was Goce Delchev? Was he this or that? And because there wouldn't be this construct of not a story, but it's a story construct rather than a historical account for the beginning of the Macedonian prerodba or rebirth, which was there was no independent process of Macedonian rebirth, so even in 1945, had there been a political decision to, in a completely different alternate universe, have Macedonia remain part of Bulgaria under whatever kind of political regime, I believe that even that generation who had already developed some independent Macedonian thinking over the course of the years would have accepted being part of a Bulgarian state, and even long-term generations after that could have sort of accepted that their Bulgarian and Macedonian identity are sort of overlapping, low and high sort of culture. So this is a normal process. And lastly, had it not been the idea of creating a Macedonian state, but instead the status quo pre-World War II, we could have had Southern Serbs now speaking Serbian there, They're not far from that, but they have strong Macedonian identity, and it could have been purely Southern Serbian identity, except that if they had accepted the Serbian historical narrative, we wouldn't have a dispute who's Goce Delchev, because they would know, just like Serbs do, he was a Bulgarian from Macedonia, person who belonged to the Bulgarian nation from the geographic region of Macedonia and associated also with the people of Macedonia. So, because we talked about 1921, and so one of the other two founding members have published in 1919 and 21, and I want to read those quotes again. The first one was an article, Macedonia for the Macedonians, this big idea for which Anton Dimitrov, one of the 6 founding members, originally Imaro, I should say. As we express our warmest gratitude to beautiful Bulgaria, which fraternally welcomes not only us, Bulgarians from Macedonia, is very clear and explicit about their identity, her compatriots, but also refugees from various parts of the world. That's because lots of Armenians, it was a very difficult time, and refugees, a lot of Christians from other parts of the Ottoman Empire, predominantly Armenians, came to Bulgaria during that period, which is why Bulgarian population spiked during that time from like 4.5 to almost 6.5 million people, over the years, not like overnight,
Sure.
but over her compatriots, but also all refugees from various parts of the world. We consider it our duty to appeal to the Bulgarian statesmen not to stop acting together with us where it is necessary for a faster return to our birthplaces. So he's okay. The duty to Bulgaria should continue to help them eventually, So there was still this sense that in one way or another they could return, maybe a new independent Macedonia, maybe something else, Poparsov, in his bulletin number 8 of the United Former Internal IMRO, wrote an article in which, again, he said that the terrible conflicts that occurred mainly in Macedonia and resulted in Russian consuls with a whip in hand forcing Bulgarian peasants to become Serbs. The Bulgarian in Macedonia were treated like Sudanese blacks who, according to the will of the Russian Tsar, had to be handed over to Serbia for the punishment of the disobedient Bulgaria. As the latter became dangerous as Austria's vanguard for Russia's interest toward Constantinople, which as the latter became dangerous as Austria's vanguard for Russia's interest toward Constantinople. So again, here clearly saying that they look at themselves at the national level as part of the Bulgarian nation, Bulgarian peasants, and it also describes the conditions under which these people operated, So it's the post-World War I conditions. So this is actually an earlier period, the second part. So I should have changed them a little bit, but I'm Haji Nikolov, this is actually very interesting. The other two founding members, Haji Nikolov, who describes that in I think he wrote in this illustration in Linden magazine, which is often showing the Great Macedonia map. The greatest is oftentimes used by the Macedonists, And in that quote here, you can see that he's actually talking to Kunchov. And again, Macedonists use the part of Kunchov. He says, I came here to Bulgarize Macedonia. It means to instill Bulgarian feeling, to awaken, to start this rebirth, to start the so-called prerodba process, that's what he implies. So, of course, Macedonians use that as like trying to Bulgarize them, and he's like, no, this is what the founding member of the IMRO says, because he said that Bulgaria, there was no need to Bulgarize, because Macedonia has been Bulgarian for a long time, and that the Macedonian Bulgarians have long been waging a struggle with everyday life. Nonetheless, Macedonia needs the enlightenment that all teachers and clergy should spread at the moment. Again, something consistent with what Yusamoglu writes in her book. So it's clearly that pattern again that you're seeing. And lastly, Dame Gruev, who is in the national anthem, when he turned to the Bulgarian government several months after the Linden uprising on behalf of the Second Revolutionary District, Bitola District, on September 9th, he wrote, in view of the critical and terrible situation in which the Bulgarian population in the Bitola District, or Bitola Vilayet, fell due to the devastation and the crimes committed by the Turkish regular and Bashibuzuk troops, the Central Committee considers its duty to draw to the attention of the respected Bulgarian government to the disastrous consequences for the Bulgarian nation. He uses the word nation as well, if it does not fulfill its obligation to its identical brothers here in an impressive and active manner, which is necessary which is necessary due to the power of the surrounding circumstances and the threat that it poses to the common Bulgarian fatherland today. This is the guy who is in the anthem, and they're telling you he's not a Bulgarian, or he had no Bulgarian identity. I don't know, guys, but for those of you who sing the anthem, it's Goce Delchev, Pitu Guli, it's Megruev, and then Sandansky. I didn't pick Sandansky because he was not a founding member. Delchev actually was not the formal, he was the informal leader. Damegruev was always one of the founding members, clear, and so this is the important thing. So it clearly tells me that during that time, there was no way a sense of separate national awakening. Right. Macedonians existed, Macedonian people existed, Macedonian feeling existed, but that feeling was in no way developed at national and nation building level. And that's what we need to make it very, very clear. That fiction in Macedonian historiography needs to be cleared. And I'm going to be very clear, until that doesn't get fixed and doesn't get consistent, I'm going to continue to undermine modern day Macedonian identity, modern day historical narrative, which is bad for the way that Macedonian nation works. And I am going to be very clear. I'm going to do everything that I can in my powers to make sure that Bulgaria does not ratify membership treaty for North Macedonia until that narrative gets straightened up. We can explain it in... Yeah, go ahead.
And just be clear, if the modern Macedonian national identity accurately portrayed how this national identity came about, we don't have any problem with the concept of an ethnic Macedonian today. I don't think you do. I think the problem we have is the manner in which it is being portrayed, and how do I want to put this? In a way, the infringement on the Bulgarian identity within Macedonia. If the narrative was simply, we were a common people who, due to some historical processes in the late 19th and first half of the 20th century, grew apart and are now two separate people, I don't have any problem with that. I don't think you have any problem with that. I don't think 99% of people in Bulgaria, aside from maybe Angel Jambaski, have a problem with that. I think the problem we have is the taking people who you just quoted, the founders of the Internal Macedonian Revolution Organization, and removing the Bulgarian identity from them and imposing an ethnic Macedonian identity on them, when that identity was not, as you said, to the level of they were, again, Macedonians, but that Macedonian identity was not to a national ethnic level that we see today. I think that is what we have a problem with. I'm not, as I said before, I have no problem with the modern idea of an ethnic Macedonian nation. It's just the framework in which it is put forward is problematic, because it's not only problematic to Bulgarians. I'm not a Bulgarian from Bulgaria. I'm from Macedonia. All my family's from the region of Macedonia. I'm not attacking the ethnic Macedonian identity as a Bulgarian. The reason why I even got into this, delving into these questions and these topics, is because I did not want my identity misrepresented. I didn't want it's not just the Bulgarians who should have a problem with the modern Macedonian historiography. The Macedonians themselves should have a problem with it, because their own identity is being altered, is being manipulated. It's not healthy for Macedonians themselves to impose a false narrative on themselves, on who they are and who their ancestors were. Macedonians will say it's not Bulgaria's business. Okay, but it's our business to clear up our own history. That's a completely different question as well.
Well, whose business is it? Can you just show me the last slide with my grandmother? So it's also personal. And why is it personal? I don't want to impose on anybody, but I don't want to also my great-grandmother to be misrepresented. So this is my great-grandmother Bozia, who was born in the town of Kukush in somewhere around 1890. So this is the document that I have from my mom's cousin, Dimitar Jambazov, and it says basically, because her original birth certificate was burned in the fire of Kukush, So she didn't have a birth certificate when they arrived in Bulgaria. So the city of Sofia, the municipality of Sofia, the third district of the municipality, issued that in certifying. Now we have a story. We don't know if it's 1890 that the what he was on 1887, but she was a little too old and she couldn't start working at a tobacco factory, tobacco warehouses, so that she had to claim that she was 3 years younger than she actually was. But it says clearly that she was born in the city of Kukush, Macedonia. This was in 1946, and her father was Gosha Panev Tuturev. Her mom was Sofia Ichkova Ajulova. And so it clearly tells you that she was born there, Right. She was a member and studied for 6 years in the Bulgarian school in Kukush, which today does not, well, it was burned to ground, but the Greeks rebuilt it in the 1980s. And this is the modern day picture of what it's an not ethnographic museum. And so this is how it looks today. I don't have a picture from the way that it looked, but today we have 100 years since they were kicked out of Bulgaria, 110 years since the burning of Kukush and the Balkan Wars, and probably about 120 years since great-grandma Bozia was going to that high school. And what I have as a question is, and I'm continuing to ask everybody who claims that nation building in Bulgaria and Macedonia was a separate process, great-grandma Bozia, when she entered that Bulgarian high school, in Kukush, and she started taking her lessons in Bulgarian, her history in Bulgarian, her math in Bulgarian, was she thinking that she's taking that in a foreign, different than her native tongue language? And when she left that gate, and got out into the street, was she thinking that she switched to a Solon or Kukush dialect, which was her native tongue, her native language, different and distinct from the language of instruction? When I studied the English language high school, we took biology, chemistry, and what else in English? And we had, of course, English and English literature. And I know this was a foreign language for me. I, at this point, still have an accent, but I don't quite consider it as much of a foreign language, But I knew that this was, and my native language was Bulgarian. Was her Bulgarian her foreign language, and the Kukush dialect her native language? Was she drawing this distinction in her mind? And the answer, I think people who are watching this video have to think seriously about it and answer. That's why it is a personal thing, And if that distinction existed in her mind, if that institution building existed, and if Macedonian institutions existed separate and parallel to the Bulgarian institutions, I would be the first to jump against Bulgarian historiography, especially if world international historiography verified that, and jump against the Bulgarians and you're wrong, you deny the right of self-determination. But by creating this false, fictitious narrative, what you're doing is you're insulting my grandmother, and you're insulting, you can if you want to turn it off, you're insulting the legacy of my ancestors. And yes, that it is personal, and most important, it is personal because it is not accurate, it is not adequate. And by the way, that school was created by the Miladinov brothers from the great town of Struga, whom you, Kirill, or your ancestors might have had connection with, because they came from there. This school was the one where the older Delchev family went through, and studied, and that's why they were all part of the same nation building project, Right. And yes, my grandmother was also Macedonian. I don't have a problem saying that, and yes, we're proud of that legacy, including the Macedonian part of the legacy, and that's not a problem at all. But please understand, in her mind, there was no distinction. She died. Her daughter, my grandmother, whom I grew up with, they died. They both died with the understanding that the Macedonian and Bulgarian are not in conflict, that they're not the same, but they're not in conflict with each other. And for them, those two signs, of identity, identity pillars were overlapping, and one at a low level, subnational, and one at a national level. And we have to be very clear. She refused to marry a Greek because she wanted she went to Bulgaria with the idea that moving into Bulgaria, she's going to the motherland, the country that with whose residents it shares same national identity. Yes, when my mom's cousin Aunt Danche got married, she asked her, "Is your future husband one of our people or not?" Meaning Macedonian refugees, like there were tons of those in Sofia, or not. She said no. She said, "Well, that's okay." She let her go, let her slide,
Yeah.
So yes, there was this distinction between one of our and one of theirs, but we were part of the same project, and we have to be very clear. And until that, so if we clear that, if we get an accurate picture of what's going on, I don't think there's anything that can disrupt the process of getting the two nations close together. But until we do that, we are going to have the problems, and we're going to only pretend that we are close. We're not close. In fact, right now, we're in a state of informational warfare. I'm not waging an informational warfare, but I'm on a campaign tour to try to present scientific and scholarly and personal experience into how this could potentially be resolved, how we can get out of the ditch that we are in right now, both countries, both nations, both peoples.
Well, Professor Ivanov, I think that's an excellent place to end. I think we're pushing on 2 hours anyway, so I hope the people watching this took something from it. And I very much appreciate your willingness to come on the channel and discuss these topics with me. I very much enjoyed it, and I would welcome you to come back anytime to further this discussion or talk about any other similar topics going forward. So thank you very much. Is there anything else you want to add? Or I know you mentioned you had some publications and some stuff like that. Where can people find you, your work, maybe get in contact with you? Can you give us some of that information?
Thank you, Kirill. First, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you so much for all the great work that you do and all the great videos. They're extremely informative, particularly the historical ones. There's some stuff that is not even well known, as this the islands where the prisoners were held down and after the Balkan Wars. I found this extremely, so I warmly recommend every single video of this. And as I said, creating content in English for a broader audience is extremely valuable. My work is, I'm at the University of Cincinnati, so if you just Google my Ivan or Ivan Dinev, Ivanov or Ivanov, University of Cincinnati, because there's several of us, it's poor choice of last names by parents. But that's another story for another conversation. They can find most of my work. So my work, the book that I publish is Transforming NATO, New Allies, Missions and Capabilities. I'm working on new stuff. I got also some stuff which is primarily EU and NATO related stuff. And that's why I got into this debate from the EU and NATO institutional perspective and how we need to resolve this, settle this so that we move forward. And we cannot afford to leave that to the next generation. We can't kick the can down the road. It's just not okay to do it. So they can also find me and my email and phone number, I think, are publicly available. So
and I can put a link to your university page down in the description in the comments section.
Thank you. I will send you a link to that as well. So thank you so much for the opportunity to talk and keep up the great work.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks again. And I'm sure we'll talk again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.